Good morning, everyone. This morning's webinar is entitled Making Good Trouble, Know Your Rights When Protesting, brought to you by the ACLU of Alabama. My name is Tish Gotell Faulks. I am the legal director here at the ACLU of Alabama. I am joined by my colleague, our most recently retired executive director, former legal director, and general counsel, Randall C. Marshall.
Good morning.
Representative John Robert Lewis, a native son of Alabama, devoted his life to justice and equality. He spent decades working as an organizer and activist. He served as a founding member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC, and he helped organize the 1963 Civil Rights March on Washington. In March 1965, a then 25-year-old Lewis and hundreds of other civil rights advocates and protesters planned to march from Selma to Montgomery to draw attention to the need for voting rights in Alabama. He nearly lost his life in that protest. He went on to serve in the United States House of Representatives in Georgia's 5th Congressional District from 1987 until his death earlier this year. Representative Lewis gave us words to live by as protesters and advocates here in Alabama. He said, "Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful. Be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble." As we turn to what we are discussing today, we are faced by many challenges here in Alabama at this critical moment in history. In the midst of a global pandemic, in the midst of concerns and protests as they relate to police violence, especially in light of the recent murder of George Floyd, and as we once again address questions and concerns about equal justice and equal protection under the law, as people protest and demand the removal of Confederate monuments and the renaming of places of honor currently holding Confederate names. The questions become, how can the ACLU help? And what are the rights that protesters need to know? A lot of information for us to address. Buckle up and let's get started. Here in Alabama, we have many challenges and a history of political activism and civil disobedience. Alabama is one of several locations that continue to struggle with their response to the COVID pandemic. Add to that all of the protest history culminating here in Alabama with this current outcry for justice and for demilitarization of the police forces here in our state. Finally, as we once again address racial justice interests and concerns, We have newly found protests arising around the continuing protection and need for removal of Confederate monuments and our desire to no longer reminisce fondly about the time of racial separation and inappropriate legal protection. So the first question that many of you have is, how do we prepare to protest here in the state of Alabama? Randall, I know that the ACLU receives hundreds of communications from activists, from people who are interested in having their voices heard. What are the types of questions and concerns that we regularly encounter as people prepare to protest here in Alabama?
Okay, I'm going to talk about two different things. First, I'm going to talk about organizing a protest and what you may have to do, and then talk about knowing your rights, participating in a protest. I think one of the things that I want to say at the outset that a lot of people don't realize is that the First Amendment only applies to governmental action. So if you're dealing with the police, if you're dealing with a municipality, then the First Amendment applies. If you're dealing with other individuals or private organizations, the First Amendment does not apply to them in terms of respecting your rights. So clearly, it allows for, while you're protesting, for there to be counter-protesters who are opposing what you're in favor of. But public sidewalks and parks have long been traditional forums for free expression and protest. And so if there are a handful of people standing on a sidewalk protesting a monument, generally that's allowed without any further action necessary. But government can require a permit in order to, say, close a street so that the protesters can be in the street and protected from traffic. Or if the protest will have a large number of participants. There's no firm number, and it can vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction depending on where you are. So the first thing that you ought to do if you're organizing a protest is determine whether or not you need a permit. The easiest thing to do is just to call the non-emergency number of the local police department and ask them if they have a permit requirement. And if so, if they have it in writing, please get you the necessary forms so that you can fill it out and get a permit. As I said, it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, so you have to look at it closely wherever you are. A few points, though, and oftentimes we see this come up. You will see in a written procedure that you have to apply for a permit 7 days in advance. There needs to be, and there usually is, a release valve in the policy that allows an individual, the police chief or his or her designee, to waive that advance notice requirement. And in fact, that's constitutionally required. You can't require a lengthy advance notice if the protest is spontaneous about a current event that's happening. Most importantly, you cannot be denied a permit because the officials disagree with your message. And if they do deny a permit, there needs to be an appeal process that can be looked at very quickly. Another thing that we have seen municipalities try to do, both in Alabama and across the nation, is to charge fees for providing police or cleanup. That is not permissible under the Constitution. The only fee that they can charge is a nominal fee for processing the application, and it has to be the actual cost to the municipality. And so that should rarely be more than $10 or $15.
So
But,
when,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, Randall, when we hear about reports that municipalities or police departments pass on the cost for overtime and things of that nature, are you saying that those things are impermissible?
They're absolutely impermissible. There is a lot of good law on you cannot charge people for protesting and expressing their viewpoint. I think there is a difference if you were holding an art fair, for example, and you wanted to close down a street, then and you want police protection there. I think in that kind of a circumstance, there may be some leeway for fees. But in pure political expression, such as we're talking about today, such fee shifting is impermissible.
Good to know.
Okay.
Good to know.
I will say, though, that in issuing a permit, the government does have an ability to implement what are called reasonable time, place, or manner restrictions. So, for example, you may want a particular route for a march from one point to another point. If the government comes back and says, well, we can't give you that one because that's a major artery, but we can give you this other street that's a block over, that's a permissible restriction by the government. The government can also take steps to separate protesters and counter-protesters, and so they may limit exactly where each group can be. They can limit the length of time that they're going to close a street. And so a protest, if you want to protest for 10 hours, the government may come back and say, no, this has to be done in 5 hours. That's probably reasonable. It's important that the ability to seek a permit is something that you can do on your own. You don't need a lawyer to do that. And it should be a straightforward process, and the government is certainly knows how to do that, and you should hold them to that obligation to work you through that permit. This is one area in which, and we'll talk a little bit more later, where the ACLU can help, and we're willing to consult if there are problems in obtaining a permit. Once you've got the permit or you're not the organizer, let's talk a little bit about what can happen at protests. I think one of the things that you need to keep in mind is there is a difference between protesting, which is expressing your view. So if you're standing in front of the courthouse demanding that government remove a Confederate monument, that's protected speech. And you cannot be arrested or prohibited from voicing your concerns. Civil disobedience is different, however. Civil disobedience is the willful violation of law in order to make your point. And so while you can stand in front of the monument and demand that it be taken down, if you take a rope and throw it around the monument and try and pull it down, that is not protected speech. That is a violation of laws for which you could be arrested. And the First Amendment does not protect that action. And if someone is arrested, police can use force necessary to make an arrest, but they can't use what's called excessive force. The problem, though, and I want to make clear, is there are really two constitutions. There's the Constitution that's sitting on my desk while we have this conversation, and then there's the Constitution in the streets. And while it is clear that police cannot use excessive force, it is clear that they often do. And part of the problem is what is excessive is determined after the fact and not in the moment. And so the best thing you can do is to use to film. You have the right to film police in the public doing their job, so long as you're not interfering with what they're doing. The police can and probably should separate protesters who are on different sides of the subject so that it minimizes the anger and potential violence between two different groups. If things get terribly out of hand, the police can order a dispersal and can lawfully arrest the failure to disperse after an order to do so. I think we saw part of the problem, and again, this goes back to the Constitution sitting on my desk and the Constitution in the streets. We oftentimes see the police actually instigating and causing violence at a protest. You saw that happen up in Huntsville when protesters were out past the permit time, but there was nothing going on, and the police started using tear gas and rubber bullets and other kinds of violent means to get people to disperse. While that shouldn't happen, that sometimes does happen, and at least from a lawyer, our advice would be, if you are directed to do something by the police, you should do it and talk about any action you can do later after the moment is over. That's a general overview of knowing your rights at a protest and about permits.
Now, Randall, we receive literally hundreds of communications from people here in Alabama and sometimes outside of Alabama concerning protest activity in which they have participated here in our great state. You mentioned, of course, what we had occur in in Huntsville. We've also received calls and concerns from Hoover, from Florence, from Montgomery. There are just really a lot of very interesting and challenging questions that arise. And unfortunately, oftentimes, the ACLU is not in a position to address the particular concern that we have coming in. Next slide, please. So our question then becomes how the ACLU can help in this moment.
I think one thing that's important to understand is that legal action is oftentimes the worst remedy in order to take care of the violation of rights, because it's slow, it's expensive, it's time consuming, and you don't get immediate relief. And I would also say, and as you laid out the very rich history of protest in Alabama, the Civil Rights Acts passed in the 1960s didn't come about because legislators in Washington said, oh, we need to ensure equal rights for all, let's pass legislation. It happened because of the march from Selma to Montgomery. It happened because of John Lewis taking a beating at the Edmund Pettus Bridge. It took that blood across the nation on TV to force change to happen. And I think that's what we're seeing now, is continued ongoing protest at the outrage of police violence that has been prevalent for virtually the entire history of the United States, but it has become more and more public as it's caught on film, and we all watch in horror as that occurs. So certainly what the ACLU can do in this moment is partly what we're doing now, trying to help folks understand what your rights are in organizing a protest, what your rights are at a protest, what the police can do. We can certainly help and are willing to help answer questions about permitting processes and talk to people to get them through that process. We do look at things at sort of a higher level. We're looking at patterns and practices. We want to know where there are systemic problems that can be worked on. And so we're interested if the government, be it local police, the state patrol, the state police, or even the federal government inappropriately stopping or preventing speech from occurring. That's something that is certainly protected by the First Amendment. We're also interested in patterns and practice of the police or municipalities discriminating against protesters based on their viewpoint. So, for example, allowing supporters of monuments to congregate and stand without a permit, and yet requiring a permit or prohibiting people who want to see those monuments brought down from doing the same things. So again, it's looking for patterns of practice.
Now, Randall, a question
Yes.
in that vein. What about the speech rights or the expressive rights and interests of government actors? For example, we know that in some municipalities, law enforcement, the police, have some indication or some type of paraphernalia that supports their viewpoint. Blue lives matter. Are those types of things constitutionally inappropriate?
It's somewhat of a difficult question. I will say that, yes, the police have limited First Amendment protections in doing their jobs. And so so long as it does not interfere with their doing their job, it's probably constitutionally permissible. And so the specific example that you said, the Blue Lives Matter, which is certainly offensive because of trying to play off of the real crux of the matter here, is it's not blue lives that have been at risk, it's Black lives that matter and are continually put at risk in this country at the hands of police. But more overt demonstration by the police could rise to the level of interfering with the ability of the department to do its job. And so in that aspect, the police chief or the municipality has the right to rein in on some First Amendment, what would otherwise be First Amendment protected activity.
Good to know. Good to know. Okay.
I'm sorry. The last thing I wanted to say is because this is one of the hardest questions that we often get is excessive use of force. Again, this is an area that the ACLU is not well positioned on offering immediate assistance, because the remedy for excessive use of force is a lawsuit for a violation of your Fourth Amendment rights that can take literally years to resolve, and there are a lot of legal pitfalls to get there. And so it's a rare case that the ACLU can assist an individual on a claim that they were harmed by a police officer. And so we often try and recommend that individuals seek out private counsel. If they have a good case, there are some lawyers who will take it on the expectation that if they win, then the government will have to pay their attorney's fees. Again, a lawsuit is a blunt instrument. And so one is better off in terms of advocating in a non-litigation way for reforms and changes in police departments. There is, for example, a growing movement both in Alabama and across the country to talk about divestment from the police department, to put more resources into services that alleviate a lot of the problems that people are facing in their communities, and to cut down on the use of excessive force. There are some municipalities, I don't believe there are any in Alabama, but we've read about
Any in Alabama yet.
yet, using non-police officers for mere traffic violations and things like that. There are oftentimes you don't need a gun. You need a mental health professional to address a situation. So those are things that can be done. There are also perhaps other legal services organizations that might be better positioned to take on the kind of cases that we see.
And as we look at our intake and as we address many of these kinds of concerns for which we just don't have the capacity or the depth of resources to address, we offer alternatives here at the ACLU that may be very helpful and supportive for people. Of course, we know that Alabama has legal aid services, and we also have connections to other legal service organizations, some of whom are specifically tailored to a particular type of legal question. When we're dealing with wrongful convictions, of course, we know about the Innocence Project or Equal Justice Initiative. When we're talking about concerns with being arrested, you mentioned that we have developed relationships with bail funds and with legal providers who offer low bono, that is low cost, or pro bono, that is free, legal service and support, especially for people who are involved in constitutionally significant work. And of course, here at the ACLU, we're not just a litigation house. We are a full service advocacy organization. So aside from litigation, which as you have mentioned, is a blunt instrument that's slow, expensive, sometimes very non-satisfying in the results that you can get, we also offer non-litigation advocacy, public support, communication support, partnership with other organizations that are also on the ground doing this work on a day-to-day basis. So it all is not lost if the ACLU cannot litigate or opts not to litigate your particular concern. The great state of Alabama has a deep and impressive history of supporting advocacy programs and protesters who seek equality and justice through our processes. And it's really an impressive array of tools that we bring to the fight.
I think that's well stated, Tish. If you could go to the next slide, the ACLU is involved in a broad range of things. Next slide, yes. You can see that we're involved in voting rights, criminal justice reforms, immigrants' rights, LGBTQ rights, privacy, women's rights, and very important in Alabama, reproductive freedom.
And I think that as we turn to all of those subject matters, I want to stress and reinforce to people that the information that we provide, we also make sure that we push out on social media. At the ACLU of Alabama website, of course, we have some information about knowing your rights as a protester. Interestingly enough, it's not just the protesters who go to our Know Your Rights information to guide their activity. We also have a few municipalities that stop in on our website and take a look at what they should and should not be doing. Although the information provided on the ACLU website is not legal advice, and we strongly encourage people to ensure that they are abiding by the rules and regulations in their particular jurisdiction, including municipalities. Please make sure you talk to municipal council. But what else would you recommend for protesters, social activists here in Alabama as they are making their voices heard?
I think one of the most valuable tools that protesters have is the video, is filming what's going on and working at getting that information into the hands of people who may be able to do something with it. So for example, and it's not ready to go yet, but there is a mobile justice app that the ACLU is putting together that will roll out in the future in Alabama that allows individuals to directly upload as they're filming information and data and film, so that if for some reason their camera gets lost or stolen or confiscated, that the film is still preserved. And that's another point I should have mentioned earlier is the police do not have the right to confiscate your cell phone or to demand that you delete anything that you're filming. And in fact, we would argue that you have to have a warrant to be able to open up somebody's cell phone. So finally, and I wanted to circle back to the point that you made, Tish, about it's true that municipalities sometimes look at our website, but I will say unequivocally that if a municipality says that the ACLU agrees with them, they are wrong. We have not been consulted by municipalities. We would not give our blessing, so to speak, on a particular policy that they put into place. And so bear in mind that information is out there for anybody and everybody. And in that instance, it gets misused, and we certainly put out statements to that.
Absolutely. Very good information to have in hand. If you believe that you have information, photographs, video that may help support the ACLU when it comes to demonstrating a pattern or practice of excessive use of force, we encourage you to contact us, communicate with us, so that we can get that information into our records as we kind of build a database to understand the types of things going on in municipalities across the state. We are not always able to step in and assist in a particular case, but when we notice that there's something going on that occurs over and over again, that there's a particular jurisdiction that has a troubling record concerning use of force or its response to protesters, the ACLU is interested in gathering that information, both for our advocacy work, but also as we build and develop to disassemble inappropriate governmental action on a systemic basis. When it comes to reaching out to the ACLU of Alabama, I encourage everyone to go to our website. I encourage people to email us at info@aclualabama.org. We are not looking for legal questions and communications there, but general questions and comments, giving us information when you know that there's something going on that may be of public interest and concern. And of course, we're available on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram. We really rely on cooperation with the people of the great state of Alabama to help us in improving the status of civil rights and civil liberties here in our state. Next slide, please. As we kind of close out, I would like to remind everyone that having your voice heard is critical in creating the state that you want to live in, that you want to see children grow up in, and that you expect your government leaders to be held accountable to you, the people of Alabama, as we move forward. I encourage you to make your voice heard. Please remember that November 3rd is coming up quickly, and we are going to need your voice and participation as we move forward here in Alabama. If you have any questions, concerns, comments, please email us, reach out to us, include us in your conversations, in your planning, and in your thoughts. That's all that I have for you. Randall, do you have any additional comments?
No, and I hope that this has been helpful to you.
All right.
It's your First Amendment. Use it.
Thank you.